So welcome everybody, and it's so nice to see you all here. My name is Alisha Ali. I am an associate professor in tourism and hospitality at Sheffield Hallam University. But on my other role, I'm vice chair for the Council for Hospitality Management Education, which all of you are part of because your institutions are part of CHME. So that's really, really fantastic news. For the past year, we've started to run a PGR research seminar series where we've done a number of things such as crafting time to write, developing your contribution to knowledge. We've done sessions on abductive methodology, case study research. And this year we are building on different sessions based on feedback that you have provided to us. And one of the sessions that many researchers had asked for was on data management, because the data landscape is changing and it's changing quite rapidly in front of our eyes. Sometimes I shudder in terms of thinking, how do I keep up? So I'm very, very thrilled to have my colleague here, Pete Smith. He is from our Library Research Support Service, who provides support for all our doctoral researchers as well as academic in terms of issues around data management and how we manage data. So Pete knows this area quite well. So I'm going to hand over to Pete to take us through the next 20 to 30 minutes, and then I'll open up the floor for questions. But please also feel free to pop your questions in chat, and we can also take them at the end of the session.
Okay, thank you, Alisha. So I'm going to now share my screen. So I hope what you can now see is PowerPoint. Okay, so I'm just going to minimize you all, put you all in the corner, but I know you're all still there. So yes, Pete Smith from Sheffield Hallam Library Research Support. Thank you to Alisha and all of you for inviting me along to talk with you today. And we're going to talk about research data management, or RDM. So I'll just say RDM from now on. And on the screen, the first slide, it's a diagram I found online, a free-to-use diagram, and there's a link there to where the diagram came from. Good citation practice there. And it shows very neatly, really, what RDM is all about. It's about collecting data, working with data in different ways, making sure that that data is secure, and then making sure that data is preserved for the long term, and where possible, making it available for other people to use. That's one of the big areas of change that Alisha referred to, is more and more data is now being made available on an open access basis for other people to use in big data research or to replicate studies. So we're going to be looking at each of these stages briefly in the presentation. So what are we going to cover? It's general advice. Now, you're all from different institutions, and I understand some of you are from different jurisdictions, you're from different countries in the world. So of necessity, the advice is very general. Okay, we're going to talk about what RDM is and why it's important. We'll talk about data management plans and how they fit into your research. We'll pick up on primary and secondary data, and that's referring to a specific question that Alisha passed on. Referring to another question, we'll talk about storing and organizing your data during research. And finally, preserving, and as we've just mentioned, sharing data where possible. Important notes, because, as I say, you're from different institutions, maybe different countries, always check locally. Whatever advice I give today, make sure you're aware of the laws that apply to you. For example, data protection laws. Make sure you look at your own institution, university, college, wherever you are. What are their policies and processes? What do they want you to do? And it could be within business studies, within tourism studies, there are disciplinary norms and expectations around how you manage data, how you work with data, how you share data. And finally, if you have a grant or other form of external funding, your funder is likely to have some kind of policy and process expectations as well. So whatever you read about research data management, whatever you hear about it, like today, always put it in the context of where you are locally, all the requirements of your country, your institution, your discipline, your funder, and of course, your own research. So what is RDM? Well, thinking back to that diagram on the first slide, it's processes. You're beginning a piece of research, you go through that research, and then it's finished at some point. And between those 2 points, you'll be working with data in various ways. Some points you'll be gathering the data, collecting it. At other points, you'll be analysing and processing it. And then finally, you'll be presenting it and preserving it. So RDM is data-related processes that apply throughout the project. So it's a whole project lifecycle process. And it connects to ethical, legal, and academic issues, as we'll see. It's also a practical planning tool. It's very easy to think of RDM as something very technical because it involves data and perhaps computers and statistics. But one very important aspect of it is it's a very helpful way of planning your research, be that a thesis or a paper or a conference presentation, whatever you're doing. Now, why is it important? On the one hand, RDM supports and demonstrates research integrity. Now, what does that mean? We all want our research to be used. Okay, we want it to be cited, we want it to be applied. In order for that to happen, people need to be confident that the research that we do can be relied upon. Now, I know reliability has a technical term in research, but I'm here using it more generally, that people feel confident that your research is based on data that was collected properly, that's been analysed properly. So you can demonstrate that you were ethical in your research, that you made sure that everybody involved in the research was properly informed, was kept up to date. You demonstrate that you're legally compliant. You met, for example, data protection responsibilities. And finally, not directly connected to RDM, but certainly related to it, is academic rigor, making sure that the data you're collecting connects with your research methodologies. Okay, so when somebody comes to read your research, they won't be worried that the data was made up or fudged in some way, or that there's some kind of methodological laxness going on, or that there's ethical questions. Okay, they come to your research and say, there's a data management plan, or there's an account in the methodology chapter of how this person worked with their data. And I can see it was ethically responsible, legally compliant, academically rigorous. This research has integrity. And as I said, it's also a practical project management tool because it's getting you to think about resource needs. So when you're thinking about the ethics of your research, a large part of that is, what are you doing? Are you interviewing people? Are you doing observations? Are you doing a case study? Are you going into organizations? So you think about the ethics, but you also think, okay, how am I going to do that? Have I got training in interview techniques? What about the analysis I want to do? Do I know how that works? How much time is this going to take? Will I need software? So you identify the resources you need as part of your research data management thinking, so that when you come to do the data work, you have everything you need. Also, it helps you to identify processes in your institution you can use. So there might already be established protocols in your institution for setting up interviews, for doing ethics reviews, or you can develop the processes that you need. So again, when you come to work with data, you have the resources you need and you have the systems in place to do that. And then you set that down in a document. Now, your institution might not require you to write a data management plan, but it's good practice to do so anyway. So you write a data management plan. And your institution or a funder or both might have requirements for the plan. So for example, some institutions or funders might want a specific format. They may give you a template to fill in. And your data management plan may be part of a broader process. So for example, here at Hallam, your data management plan is included in the ethics review. But your data management plan mostly is a practical project management tool. Again, it sets out for you, your supervisor, ethics reviewers, funders, colleagues, exactly how you're going to meet those ethical, legal, and academic requirements. And it also guides you as you work with data, it reminds you what you need to do. So I'm just going to pause very briefly in case there are any initial questions. Now, I can't see the chat, Alisha, because I've only got one screen. But if there's been any initial questions, I'm happy to take them before we get into the practical side of things. I'm going to guess there aren't any questions at this point. So Primary data then. This is when you're working directly with people. So it might be through a questionnaire, survey, interview, anything like that. So you'll provide some kind of information sheet, some kind of consent form. That could be in an online questionnaire, or it might be something you give to participants. You need to be clear about what data you're collecting. So what are you collecting in the interview? What are you collecting through the questionnaire? Who's going to see this data? Is it just you? Will your supervisor see it? And what are you going to do with it in your research? Will you quote things directly? Will you paraphrase them? Will you put people's names with the data, or will you use a pseudonym? Those sorts of things. So when people agree to be part of your project, they give consent, then they know what they're consenting to. And it's particularly important if you want to share your data with other people after the research is finished, you get consent for that. You explain to people that you'll make the data available for other people to read or listen to, whatever it might be. Secondary data. And Alisha mentioned particularly sites like TripAdvisor. So if you want to use existing data, secondary data, data that's already been collected in some way, for some data sets, it's important to check the license. So for example, many governments now make data publicly available. And there will be a license that explains exactly what you can do with that data. So just because you find some data on a website doesn't mean you're free to use it however you wish. It's very important to check the license to make sure it allows you to do what you want to do with it. So for example, in the UK, the government might use an open data license that says you can use this data however you wish, you just need to provide a link to the original source. But other people might say you have to request the data, and the license only allows you to use the data, it doesn't allow you to share the data with anybody else. And there are other types of data collections you might use. So for example, the data that's on a comparison site or a social media site, you need to check the terms of use of that site. So there are many papers out there that have scraped the data from sites such as TripAdvisor. And they've done so on the basis of the terms of use of the site that tells you exactly what you can do with any data you get from the site. So important to check those terms of use to see exactly what you can do with the data. So for example, it might allow you to pull data from the site, use it in your research, but not share that data any further, okay, for example. There is also ethical issues around using data from such sites, quite apart from whether you can use it according to the terms of use. So there are guidelines from various organisations about the use of, for example, social media data and research. And if you're going to do that, it could be worth just looking at those guidelines and incorporating them into your ethics. Storage. This is for digital data, okay? If they make it available to you, you should use the secure storage that's provided by your institution, okay? So that will be a single place where you keep all of your data. So you might do 20 interviews and record people and have 20 files. You might have a bunch of questionnaires somewhere. You might have data in different places. So putting all of that data into the secure storage provided by your institution will mean you've just got one place where all that data is kept. If you don't have secure storage provided by your institution and you have to use your own computer, then make sure it's as secure as it can be. So make sure that only you have access to it, it's password protected, and you can encrypt the data itself. But the ideal is that you transfer your data from wherever you got it on a recording device or on a website for questionnaires, download it and move it to one place. So here at Hallam, for example, we give our researchers access to something called the Research Store, which is a network drive, which is highly secure, regularly backed up, so it's very safe. If you have got data on something like a voice recorder or a video recorder, use encryption to protect it. So that can be a password on a folder or on a file or some encryption software. Just keeps it safe in case the device is unfortunately lost or stolen. It means at least the data can't be accessed by unauthorized people. And if you need to transfer data, for example, you're out working in the field, in a business, for example, and you have some recordings and you want to transfer them over the internet to secure data storage, always use a secure network. Don't use the free Wi-Fi at the coffee shop, basically. And where possible, you can use secure drop-off services for files. So for example, here at Hallam, we subscribe to something called Zend2, and you can agree a password with a colleague, and then you can send them files through this service and they can download them. Or you can use Zend2 to send files to yourself. So let's say you're not on campus. You could put your files from your recording device into Zend2 and then pick them up when you are back on campus and put them on your secure storage. You need to organize your data sensibly as well. Makes it easier for you to work with, and if you are going to share it with other people, makes it easier for them to work with. So have a clear folder structure with a few well-named folders. So you might have 3 folders full of interviews, one with the original audio, one with the transcripts of that audio, and one with your analysis. And then the file name should be clear. So even though your folder might be called interviews, you should include the word interview in the file name as well, in case you or somebody else is using that file outside the context of that folder. And you can create a README document. So I did this originally for chemists, I think. So if you did a chemical experiment and you had a bunch of things called reagents 1, the README document would explain what they were. What a README document does is it helps people work with the data, even if they haven't got your thesis, for example, with its methodology chapter there. Your README document will say, this was the data I collected. And if it has things like variables or statistics, it will say, here are the labels, here's what these numbers mean. If you did qualitative analysis, it would say, here are my codes and themes, and this is what that means. So when people are looking at their data, it's not just a whole load of spreadsheets with meaningless numbers. There's a document there to provide context. Now, when your project is finished, your thesis is finished, you've got all your publications done, some universities say that you have to put your data somewhere for the long term. It must be preserved. And some universities either require you to share that data, or, as at Hallam, they encourage you to share it. And some funders require you to share the data. Okay, so at the very least, for many of you, you'll need to put a copy of your data somewhere secure for the long term. And many of you might then share that data with other researchers. So your institution might have a data archive, a dedicated server where all the research data goes and it's kept secure. You might also, or instead of using the institution data archive, maybe they don't have one, there are services like Zenodo or the UK Data Service where you can upload your data as well. Now, one of the questions was, how long do we keep the data? That depends on your institution's policy. So here at Hallam, the policy says we keep data for at least 10 years. Okay, and it might be longer if you share that data and people are downloading and using it. So check your institution policy to see how long they say data should be kept. And there could be national legal standards around that as well. And external funders might need you to keep data for longer. So for example, here, some of the medical research funders want some data to be kept for a very long period of time. So for longitudinal study purposes, looking at a whole sort of life cycle. When you are preserving data, it's important to make sure that people in the future can access that data. So we use what are called open formats, like .txt for word processing, .csv would be for things like spreadsheets. So those formats don't require specific software for people to use them, okay? If there is a file format which can't be made open, that's what's called a proprietary file format, where you need specific software for it to work. In the README document, you would then say what software you need. So for example, there are files called .nvp created by NVivo, which is used for qualitative analysis. So then anybody in the future who needs to access those files will know what software they need to get them. Now, when it comes to sharing your data, if you are going to, and there can be very good reasons why you don't, the principal reason will be ethical. Either you don't have consent to share someone's data, or you feel it's too risky to share that data. So for example, if you did research on whistleblowing or other forms of sort of ethical practice issues, you might feel it's too risky to the participants to share the data. But if you are sharing the data, you can embargo it. keep it private for a time. So, for example, some of you might publish your thesis as a book or some articles or some other format, and you don't want your data and your thesis to be out there publicly whilst you're doing that. So you ask your institution to keep your thesis and your data private for, say, 2 years. Or it could be your data has commercial value. It could be your research leads to some sort of product or service that you and your institution can benefit from commercially. And you want to keep that data private whilst you get that benefit. So again, when you put your data into the archive, tell the people at your institution you need to be kept private for, let's say, 2 years. And when the embargo is up, people can use your data. And remember, we talked about checking the licenses. You would decide what license to apply to your data. So you could decide anybody can use your data however they want. They just have to acknowledge where it came from. Or you might limit it in some way, and you can talk about that with the people who manage your data archive. So a summary then. RDM supports research integrity and project planning, and it does this by getting you to think about ethical, legal, and practical issues. Okay, how are you going to be ethically responsible in working with your data? How are you going to be legally compliant in working with your data? And how are you going to make sure you have practical solutions in place to work with your data? It's important to think about organizing and storing your data so it's easy to find and understand, but also so that it is secure. And always think about what you want to do with the data after your project. Now, there's a few bits of further help that you can get. There's an online RDM course that was designed at Edinburgh. And bear in mind that is UK based. So as I said earlier, always think about your local context. And your institution may well have online support. So for example, here the link is to Hallam's RDM pages. And I noticed a slight mistake there. I hadn't taken out a Hallam specific thing in the last slide. So what I'll do is I'll make sure I send Alisha the most up-to-date version of these slides, and she'll send them out to you. But if you visit Hallam's RDM pages, you're more than welcome to. There's lots of very good general advice that applies to anyone. But always bear in mind that you might then need to check what your institution wants you to do, what your local legal system wants you to do, if there are people today from outside of the UK. With that, that's the end of the slides. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to briefly hand you back to Alisha, and then if there are any questions, comments, observations, concerns, I will try to deal with them.
Thanks a lot for that, Pete. So I'm going to stop the recording now so we can have a discussion and open up the floor to questions.